At some point, healing can start to feel like a full time job, and somehow you still feel exhausted. What if doing everything right is actually the thing slowing you down? Welcome back to Women on the Brink. So, there's a moment that can happen, when you're trying to recover from major stress or burnout or an illness, even, or even just a period where your body has really clearly said to you, look, I've had enough. And I think it's normal for this instinct to kick in that we have to do more to try and mitigate it, to fix it or make it go away. To gather that support and all the information and all the treatments that we think we need. So, you book the appointment with the functional medicine practitioner and with the acupuncturist, maybe the naturopath, Reiki, and maybe even, you start changing your diet and you add in some supplements. And on the surface, this all makes sense because, these are good things, supportive things. But what I've come to understand, both personally and clinically, is that there's a very fine line here because the body doesn't always experience all of this stuff that's going on as support. Sometimes it experiences it more as input. A lot of change happening all at once is more for the body to process, more to respond to, more to take on. And when you're already depleted, this really matters. So, my experience with this is I went through a period where my body was essentially crashing. It was an autoimmune situation that forced me to stop in a way that I hadn't needed to before. And my first instinct was exactly this: do more, find the answers, layer the support. But what I started to notice was that the more I added, the more things started tipping again. My system felt overwhelmed by trying to do too much. Even if each individual thing was good, it was too much because my reserves were already so low. And instead of feeling better, I felt like my body was constantly trying to keep up. So my body was in such a state of deficiency because I'd been running on very little sleep for a number of years and having three small kids. I was always on. And, even after the kids went to bed, inevitably somebody would get up with a tummy ache or, a fever or a cold. And I had never experienced that kind of burnout before. So I didn't really know how to get my body back in balance. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we talk a lot about deficiency and excess. And so when someone's depleted, low energy, low reserves, burned out, the goal isn't to push the system. It's to support it and very, very gently. Because even things that are meant to move certain types of energy can often be too much. You can actually move too much chi, and you can stimulate a system that doesn't have enough to sustain that kind of movement. So instead of helping it, it can actually leave you feeling more drained. Now, the same goes for diet. When I was in that place, I had to really simplify things. There's a lot of messaging out there about cleansing and fasting and juice diets. And some of those can have a place for some people, but they can also be very hard on a system that's already depleted. I found what I needed was warm, simple, nourishing foods, and I was eating smaller meals more frequently. And it was all about consistency over intensity. And then as far as exercise, again, it's important to move our bodies regularly, but maybe some days stretching is all the body can handle. Especially as I get older, I really have to pay attention to this and adapt my workouts accordingly. So back when, the autoimmune condition started, this was just another big shift for me because, when you're used to being active, the instinct is to push through, to sweat it out or to get your energy back by using more energy. But that's not how it works when your reserves are really low. And so I had to take more breaks and move more gently instead of intensely and listen to the difference between effort and depletion. So, I went from being a gym junkie, 3, 4 days a week and running a couple of days a week to really cutting back on all of that and incorporating things like easy walks and yoga. Yoga became a big part of my life. So sometimes the most supportive thing wasn't a workout, it was rest, or like I said, the short walk, or maybe even nothing at all. And the same goes for treatments. This is where it can get tricky because there's so many incredible modalities out there, and it's really tempting to want to do them all at once. But what I've learned is that spacing matters, integration matters. So your body needs time to actually respond to what you're doing. So instead of stacking treatments back to back, it can be more supportive to, limit to one treatment a day and maybe even only doing 2 to 3 treatments in a week. And most importantly, is letting your practitioners know what else you're doing because all of these inputs interact and your care works best when it's coordinated and not layered. So here's the lifestyle piece that no one really talks enough about. What surprised me the most was how much I had to adjust my life, not just my health routine. So I had to really set clear boundaries and say no to more things and be very mindful of who I was spending my time with and how long I was out with people or engaged with people. And I really needed to create more space to rest. And the one thing I've mentioned before is sometimes we're not even aware of what certain things can do to our nervous system. So, it really matters what music we're listening to, because if we're listening to heavy metal, that's going to obviously have a certain effect on your body's nervous system. Um, Same with movies. I mean, if you like thrillers or if you like horror movies, it's going to be very different on your system as opposed to maybe a rom com or a documentary. So it's really being mindful of, what's taking away and what's filling your cup. For me, I had to be very careful with the social energy because, with young kids, a lot of your time is spent in their social circles. So that took time for me. And honestly, it takes months to start to feel a real shift. This doesn't happen overnight. So, the deeper lesson here is what I came to understand is that healing isn't something that you can force, it's something you need to support. And there's a big difference because doing more doesn't always equal healing faster. Sometimes doing less is what actually allows the body to catch up. So, if you're in a place right now where maybe your body's asking you to slow down and every part of you wants to speed up and fix it, you're not alone. That instinct is very human, but there's also another approach, and that involves experimenting with letting go. Letting go of trying to control every outcome, letting go of the urgency, and trusting, even just a little bit, that your body knows what it's doing and that healing is a process, right? That you're looked after and that things can shift, especially when you're not pushing every moment. And it's not easy and it's definitely a practice. But over time, it becomes a skill. And maybe it's a little less optimize everything and a little more what happens if I let my body lead for a change? It's a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit unfamiliar, but surprisingly a lot more sustainable.